Good. Yeah.
Chief, how you feeling?
You know what? She was coming out, but she had actually just, I think yesterday, she had another seat. So I kept her out, she just got out. And then,
All right.
Top, Debbie.
Nobody seems to know.
They're supposed to.
It's kind of the old.
Right now.
I triple checked. They're all supposed to be here, but they're not.
Can we call a meeting to order? or
Yeah,
not?
you've got a quorum of 4.
We do?
Yeah, 4 out of 7, you're good to go.
Oh, okay. God, I keep thinking we got 9. If I could have your attention, please. I'd like to call to order the Board of Trustees of Blinn College workshop meeting for Tuesday, May the 18th, 2021. It is the noted time of 4 p.m. and we will anticipate that our other 3 board members will be joining us fairly soon. I need to make a note that public access to this meeting is in room 2 and 3 of the Blinn College Student Center at 651 Blinn Boulevard. And any member of the public who wishes to attend the meeting or make public comment at the meeting will need to do so in rooms 2 or 3 of the Student Center. As required by state law, this meeting is open to the public, but by telephonic communication, the college is complying with the suspended proceedings of the Open Meetings Act in accordance with sections 418.016 of the Texas Government Code. Members of the public are entitled to participate and address the college through remote connections. A live stream of this meeting is available on YouTube. Let me also acknowledge that the Texas Government Code permits the Board of Trustees to meet in a closed executive session for the following reasons: to consult with the district's attorneys on matters deemed privileged by the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct, or Government Code 551.071. We can also deliberate regarding real property under 551.072, a prospective gift under .073, certain personnel matters under .074, security devices or security audits under .076, and economic development negotiations under .087. If the board meets an executive session, we will announce that particular section under which we will be doing so prior to the initiating of the closed portion of the meeting. as I understand it, we've had no one sign up for public comment. So that will take us directly into the items that we want to discuss. I want to acknowledge or say to my fellow trustees that the purpose of this workshop is for us to ask any and all questions that you might have regarding the district-wide facilities master plan, the workshop related, the portion of this workshop that is related to our 2021-22 budget, and then an update on the COVID-19 protocols. I would like to remind the trustees that it's the plan, it's the plan for the coming year to make such budget discussions, budget committees will be open to the board meeting, to the board members, all trustees, and we would encourage you to do so. We had a recent budget workshop, and sadly enough, or unfortunately, and I know it was a new thing, but we needed to, this is a time for y'all to participate and learn more about the goings on of the physical part of the operation of the college. And I would encourage you to please try to make time to attend those workshops in the year ahead. Okay, that concludes my lecture for the morning. Mr. Wells, Reverend Wells, we're glad to have you here. That brings us to item number 3, which is the presentation and final discussion on the district-wide facilities master plan. Mr. Savani, is you going to kick that off for us, or Richard O'Malley, or some Richard is going to do this for me, I know.
Thank you, Mr. Moser, Dr. Hensley, members of the board. It's an exciting time we're at with our master plan, and we're here tonight to have a little workshop to discuss, to answer some of the questions that were asked at the last meeting. The Gensler's team is here. They've got some slides that they're going to show and go through all the different questions that we received, primarily on enrollment projections, some cost items, and then some space projections as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the Gensler team, and feel free to ask questions as we go through the process, and we'll sort this out. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for your leadership and guidance throughout this process. Good afternoon, Chairman Moser, members of the board, and Dr. Hensley. We're happy to be here with you today and at this juncture in the planning process. We transmitted the final document a couple of weeks back. I hope that you've had a chance to take a look at it and familiarize yourselves with it so that we can have a good discussion about it here today. Our intention for this workshop is not to present any new information. Everything that we've done in the master plan is in that final document. So the purpose of today is to really touch on a couple of topics, as Richard mentioned, that you've asked us to dive a little deeper into, and then spend some time answering any other questions that you have. So we have, in addition to myself, should have started by introducing myself again. I'm Meredith Epley McWilliams. I was the lead planner on this project. We also have Alan Collier here today. He was the principal in charge on the project with Gensler, and Doug Lowe is here from Facilities Programming and Consulting to speak to the work that he and his team did in terms of the campus growth projections. So with that, I will hand the mic over to Doug to get us started talking about enrollment projections, projected growth, especially at the RELLIS campus, the correlation of projected growth and space needs, and talk a little bit about the hypothetical scenario that they have developed for us to look at and talk about in terms of future campus locations.
Thank you, Meredith, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to tee up the master plan, if you will, by reminding you all that this has been a data-driven exercise, and that the decisions that have been made to date and the presentations that you will see this afternoon are evidence-based. To remind you of what we talked about the last time I was in front of you, I believe it was December, there was an awful lot of information about how we were projecting enrollment. And the graphic that's in front of you now talks about one of those implications. your taxing district and service area, are in the middle of the page, obviously. But you also are very unique among colleges because you draw from, I like to use the word steal, many of your students, a significant number of your students from your larger peers to the east and west, Lone Star and Houston and ACC. So we have included in our projection models, not just your own information and your own turf, but the implications of being able to project or to get some of your enrollment from those, from your peers. This graphic summarizes the future enrollment for Blinn. To the left of the page, obviously, is historical, and you can see a dip through COVID. And then we are going to all come out of this on the other side and with a very, very robust growth, kind of catching up to where we were and then moving forward. The top line is your district as a whole, growing out to about 19,000 students by 2040, which is about a growth of 4,600 students. So that's significant. The red line, second from the top, is the BRYAN campus. And the discussions about BRYAN were maybe we should not overcrowd it in the future. So the college has established a sort of a de facto target. How do we right size that campus so we don't experience overcrowding? And that's why you'll see that growth tapering or hitting a plateau at about 9,500 and then being artificially extended out to the right. The logic behind that was you have RELLIS coming on board, again, experiencing some significant growth of its own. That might be the perfect place to absorb the growth that would otherwise occur at BRYAN. So we are including that in the projections. The gray line is this campus, pretty mature, pretty stable, not much growth. And then at the very bottom of the page are Sealy and Schulenburg. We've looked at the campuses at BRYAN and RELLIS in more detail on this page. Top left is the BRYAN campus. We use several different methods of projecting enrollment. One is obviously a historical trend. We also looked at the capture rate, and capture rate is a modeling tool that says of the total pool of students, potential students, how many are you currently capturing? And then we extend that rate across population growth in the future. That's one of the lines. Another is the projected high school graduating classes and what the growth is there. And we come up with an average line of all the different methods. What's significant is what I just explained about the 9,500 student target. You see the dotted line in the top left graph. It shows the Blinn or the BRYAN campus hitting that line and then moving to the right. So if you didn't establish that target and move some of the growth over to RELLIS, you might expect the growth at BRYAN to continue into the 12,000 range, which I think you'd experience some growth or some overcrowding that you have to deal with. So the corollary to that on the bottom right graphic is the RELLIS campus, and it shows those multiple growth scenarios and the average in red. But the dotted line here is doing the opposite. It's absorbing the excess growth that would have occurred at BRYAN. So RELLIS is going to grow faster than it would normally grow because we're assuming if you target BRYAN at 9,500, those students are going to move over to RELLIS. So that's why the dotted line at RELLIS is moving up towards 6,000 and beyond. We then used enrollment as the primary predictor of space. We take the on-campus students and the students who are taking predominantly, or the on-campus students and the hybrid students who are participating both on campus and off, and use those as our kind of our raw input. Students that are only taking online courses, we did not factor into the projections because they have a minimal space need on campuses. We then project the educational and general space, or E and G space, for each one of those, for all of the projected growth. And that allows us to determine how much space is required. And we do this for each campus as we move forward. We use a model that is supported by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. That model was developed for four-year institutions. So we've taken some liberties and have adjusted it based on how you're currently using your space at Blinn. And that tells us how much space we need in the future. The answer is different for each of your campuses. And I'll walk you through the three graphics. If you look on the left-hand side, the BRENHAM campus, it represents, there's gray and there's blue. And the gray represents the available space and the blue represents the projected space. So if you believe how the model is projecting space in the future, it will tell you that you have a little bit more space on this campus than you would need if you were starting from the ground up. And we believe that because a mature campus like this one will wind up over time with space that was designed in previous decades that is not the kind of space that you need in the 21st century. So that's why you have a bit of an excess on this campus. You have the opposite situation on BRYAN, where the demand for space, again by the model shown in blue, outdistances the available space on the campus. Now, I mentioned this is a coordinating board model. It was developed for four-year institutions, and it is, well, shall we say, a bit short on the realities of a two-year college campus. So it tends to overproject the demand for space. So we always like to temper that by how you have been using space in the past on each one of your campuses. The graphic on the right is the RELLIS campus. And again, the gray represents the current space and the blue represents the projected demand. And you can interpret from that that the demand for space at RELLIS is going to outpace your ability to build buildings. You will have more students faster than you will build buildings, which I think is a very efficient way to operate. Ultimately, by the time you get out to 2040, it should stabilize and the space provided will be in alignment with the enrollment. We also looked at the potential for a new location or an additional satellite or future campus. You currently obviously have gone out I-10 to the west with Sealy and Schulenburg. You can see that Lone Star, your neighbor to the right, all the little green symbols with mortarboards are their centers and campuses, and they're moving predominantly up to the north. The table to the right shows the zip codes and the population of 18 to 64-year-olds who are your potential students. And the coloring represents the zip codes that have the greatest increase in population over the coming decade. So you can see that the zip codes that are colored the darkest green are the ones that have the most potential students coming. So if you take all that into account, look at your taxing district and service area hatched and then with the red outline, you can see that there's a potential for something in the Waller area. It's sort of just beyond the current vision of Lone Star. It's outside of where Houston Community College would be going along I-10, but it's still very close to those dark blue zip codes on the map where the highest growth is coming. So if you were to consider a campus in the Waller area, we think that it is it's worth further study. It's population rich, and you're not necessarily in the backyard of Lone Star or Houston Community College. So we took a further look at this and started with 1,500 students potentially, which is what RELLIS started with, and projected that growth out to the future, and think that the average of all the projection scenarios is the dotted red line. So you would have about 500 students growing, or a growth of 500 students if you were to open a campus there in the coming 2 decades. Now, one thing to consider I'm going to back up just a moment, that location, there's the potential for it to take some of your students away from the BRENHAM campus. But I could argue the opposite side of that. It could also become sort of a feeder for the BRENHAM campus. You could have students who take their first semester at Waller and then say, I want the real experience, and move into BRENHAM or maybe even to RELLIS. So. All right, I have presented a good bit of information, and I've summarized to just show the high points. I want to open it for any questions if people have any thoughts about how we made our projections, or any discussion about the data.
One real quick question. The 6,500 students at RELLIS was by roughly 2040.
Yes. Yes. Mhm.
Was there is there a calculation in all of this about workforce students, people that are in the workforce training programs and so forth, or is that?
I'm not presenting that today, but we did look at workforce and looked at how to kind of blend your student population and certain offerings to include more workforce. Yes. So the numbers are in there in these total roll-up slides. I'd be happy to break that out for you. I just don't have that to present.
I also have a question about would there be any advantage to having the Sealy campus in a different location than where it is there? And not just in Sealy, not just, but there's a tremendous growth coming out through the Fulcher area. And I realize that Fulcher is in Harris County or Fort Bend County, but
Yes.
Those counties all come together right now.
We looked at that, and Houston Community College is following that growth very closely as you move out Katy and further to the west. That they have brand new facilities, large scale campus at Katy. So you might be fighting a headwind if you were to go head to head with them. We thought that Waller was more of a desert in terms of existing campuses or even centers, might be more fertile for Blinn to go there. So.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Thank you for the excellent report. And there seems to be a lot of moving pieces here because we're still trying to track how much of the growth at RELLIS is transferred from the BRYAN campus. And then the same scenario, if we did a Waller campus, how much would that be subtracting from the BRENHAM campus? But then the question is also taking facilities offline like we're doing and having the trinity of on-campus, online, and hybrid. Again, how does that factor into those projections?
We did an analysis of online and hybrid and on-campus students and are projecting the growth based on a combination of that. Once we get out of COVID, we think there will be more interest in on-campus and hybrid education as there was before. So we have discounted the online education as we projected space. We didn't think that the online only. But yes, we looked at that in considerable detail and have those projections by class of students, much like we did with the workforce and general education. So.
You had a question, Dennis? Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, and it actually was kind of a follow-up to what Randy was saying. You're kind of reading my mind, Randy, but you just said you discounted the online growth because of it's not going to grow like you think it is.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Online students have a much lower demand for space on a campus. So we projected the online students, but we did not include them when we projected the space demand.
Right, so
So
I
we're
understand
only-
that, but any projections on the online enrollment? on what
Yes.
That would be?
Yes, I just don't have that with me in the slide deck. But
Okay.
that's part of that was part of our analysis.
Okay, because but they do require some ancillary
They do, yes.
items and
Mhm.
operations. So was that considered? at
Counseling,
all?
and yes, that's all factored in when we made the adjustments to the coordinating board's model. We over projected space for counseling and testing and things that truly online students would need when they came to campus.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Rebecca, Mrs. Ada?
Because the numbers like the 22.5, that was no online,
That's correct.
correct? Okay, that was.
Thought it was best to present it that way so that we had an apples to apples comparison
Mhm.
of students and space.
Okay.
But we have appendix tables that talk about that, just not today.
Any other questions? None?
Well, thank you very much. Again,
Are y'all at the end? I'm sorry I'm late, but
So
Well-
we do have a couple of other topics to cover in our deck that we
Hey.
can run through, or if you have more
okay, well,
questions
why
about.
don't you go ahead and finish, and someone else may have asked the questions I'm going to ask, and you can just tell me to get with them later. So, but go ahead, and if you don't cover them this time and I still have them, I'll ask them then.
Sure thing. Okay, so the next topic that we were going to touch on today was the conceptual costs that we developed for each of the master plan projects that were identified. These are in the appendix portion of the document in greater detail. What we'll show today is more of a roll-up of those costs by campus and phase for the 3 campuses where new projects were identified. That's at BRENHAM, BRYAN, and RELLIS. So these project costs were developed by our consultant, Project Cost Resources. And before we jump into the numbers, I'll just make a couple of general notes. For the master plan, we developed estimates for all the projects in phases 1 and 2. And those costs were escalated based on the end of each master plan phase. So for phase 1, which was 2021 through 25, the costs are shown in $2025. For phase 2, which was 2026 through 30, the costs are shown in $2030. We did not develop costs for the phase 3 master plan projects, largely because of that time frame, knowing that we're looking 10 to 20 years out at that point, that a lot of things can change about those projects in that time frame, and also because the escalation factor looking 20 years out would really start to skew those numbers as a point of reference. We showed cost ranges for all of the enhancement projects in the master plan. Those are mostly site related, and that is due again because of the variability associated with those projects in terms of the actual area of land that will ultimately be addressed and the level of planting, finishes, and furnishings on those site type projects. And just generally, we want to make a note that these are very high level costs, and we do fully expect that those numbers will come further into focus as each individual project is further defined in terms of its timeline, its program, and its scope. So we'll look first at the BRENHAM campus. In phase 1, we identified 10 master plan projects, as well as several existing buildings for demolition by 2025. So those projects total up to about $58, $59 million. In phase 2, we had 14 projects identified, as well as some additional demolitions on that campus. Those projects add up to about 128 to 131 million. I want to note here that one of the projects in phase 2 is a P3 residence hall. And if I recall correctly, that project itself was estimated to be about $50 million. So that one project makes up a little more than a third of the total that you see here. And as a public-private partnership, the intention is that would be funded by outside partners. Moving to look at the BRYAN campus, we had 6 master plan projects identified in phase 1 and a couple of building demolitions. The phase 1 total for BRYAN is in the range of $43 to $44 million. And looking at phase 2 on BRYAN, we had 8 projects identified, a couple additional demolitions in that phase. The total there is about $66 to $71 million. Moving to the RELLIS campus, in phase 1, we did not have any additional master plan projects identified beyond the administration building that is currently under construction. So we're just looking at in phase 2, adding a 3rd building at that campus and also expanding the on-campus parking facilities there. So that project was estimated at about $84 million. So when we look at this at a district level, I'm sure y'all are tallying the numbers yourselves. Phase 1 across the district comes in at just over $100 million. And in phase 2, again, these are in 2030 dollars. The estimate ranges between 277 and 286 million. So I want to note here again, we've talked about the flexibility of the master plan before, and that applies here to the costs as well. We understand that each of these master plan projects will be implemented as funding and market conditions allow. So it's very possible that a project might slide from phase 1 to phase 2, 2 to phase 3. The master plan is here to use as a tool to help prioritize these projects as y'all make decisions going forward.
Excuse me, can I ask you a question? I'm
Sure
not
thing.
sure I heard it correctly. Phase 2 of the BRENHAM, did you say that includes a P3?
That's correct. The numbers shown here do include that P3
Okay,
project
but in a
estimate.
P3 environment, that would not be a cost to us. So
That's correct.
we really should not include that as a potential cost for us going forward, if I'm correct.
That's right. The estimate was developed as, again, a point of reference,
Okay.
but it is not intended to be a cost to the district. Are there any other questions on these conceptual costs before we move? That's right.
Would that be anticipating just additional new replacing what some of the P3 we have?
It would not replace any of the P3 that you have, but several of your existing dormitories or residence halls on this campus have been identified for demolition due to their age. So those P3 residence halls would replace and augment your housing stock.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay. We have
She has some more.
a little bit more content
Oh,
on the Sealy and Schulenburg campuses, if you're ready.
Another shot. here.
All right. Alan Collier, step up to speak to those topics.
Thanks, Meredith. Good afternoon. It's good to be before you again. So I'm going to talk about the last topic that came out of the questions from the board upon your review of the master plan, and it's around the future considerations for the Sealy and Schulenburg campuses. As you looked at the analysis that Doug Lowe and his team did on future growth projections and space needs on all of your campuses, as we have looked at where the potential growth within your service area will be in the next 5, 10, and 20 years, it became clear that they're, unlike your other 3 campuses that you currently have in BRYAN, BRENHAM, and RELLIS, Sealy and Schulenburg are projected, and they have been on this trend for some time, of decreasing enrollment. I think currently you have roughly 100 to 130 students at both of these campuses. And so as we did our analysis and we began to look at where we saw the growth and the potential for the Blinn College District, questions arose as to whether and what role Sealy and Schulenburg play in the long-term future for the district. And so that really is the question. As oh, and Chairman Mosier, you had asked earlier if the possibility for moving the location in Sealy might make a difference. We're going to talk about that. So again, these are the considerations for the Schulenburg campus, and we'll start there. The fact that it is anticipated to experience declining growth over the next 10 to 20 years. The fact that its current facilities, which are owned by the district, but are largely underutilized. And because of the locals' sort of decreasing involvement and support for the school financially, we began to wonder, does this continue to have a future role for the district? And we had presented before that there are three options, essentially. There's a status quo, continue on. We understand that it's, it is moving along, it's just not growing. And so you could just continue your operations and providing the services that you have. There's also the evolve, and that is where, you begin to look at maybe we're not hitting on all of the curriculum and the programs that are meaningful for this part of the service area. And so to make those adjustments and then to continue moving on. And then the last one is to, continue to provide online to all the students who are attending Blinn in that fashion, but to close the physical campus. We're not making a recommendation. We're here, though, to help you have a discussion about making an informed decision on behalf of the district. But it also doesn't mean you have to make a decision today. You can make a decision next year or 5 years from now. But it may be something that you want to have on your radar and really pay attention. Is this representing Blinn's brand? Is this what we want to put out into the public as a part of our district? Or is this something that needs more support? So anyway, those are just considerations. With regards to Sealy, a lot of the considerations are very similar. We're not seeing any growth projected for the Sealy campus. Again, its facilities are largely underutilized, and it's, from a brand standpoint, it's in a strip center that is pretty much vacant, and you're in the back of it. And you're on an elevated piece of land. So as you're going down I-10, you kind of see this strip center up there, and it's in the back. And so again, we wondered if in fact it's partly due to location and its lack of visibility. You do have a sign, I do admit, or would Sealy have a better opportunity if it moved to a different, more high profile location somewhere in Sealy? We don't have that answer, and we really don't know if you have that answer. But again, it's something that should be under consideration going forward. Now, Sealy is your first opportunity to put your brand out there on I-10. Once you go through past Brookshire and you're heading into Sealy, and then there's your facility. As Doug said, though, Houston Community College just started a brand new campus at Grand Parkway and I-10. So, the competition continues to surround. Again, the status quo, just continue on doing what you're doing and in the location that you're at. The second option is a new location, and that if you are committed to Sealy, I think that should be a strong consideration. We understand that the owner of the strip center has been discussing raising his lease rate. And so do you want to pay more money for something that may not be giving you the return on your investment? And then the third option, again, is provide services online, but not to have a physical presence in Sealy. And in some cases, maybe this is where you then put your focus and your resources into developing a new campus that has a higher growth potential, as Doug had mentioned. That's really the point of it. We just wanted, again, to sort of lie out the different considerations that each of these campuses have, their pluses and their minuses, and then reach out to the board and say, this is something we would recommend you looking at more closely going forward. Are there any questions? Great, thank you.
Any questions? Thank you.
So those are the topics that we had prepared slides to speak about today. At this point, we'll take any additional questions that y'all would like to discuss about the master plan process or the final documents.
Douglas? Oh, okay. Rebecca.
I'm curious, and I know I've read through the information, but there's a lot in there, so maybe you can answer this. Is Sealy and Schulenburg, if they're not growing, did y'all pinpoint any reasons why they aren't, or things that we need to do to improve that?
We did not pinpoint a specific reason for why they were not growing. Again, we're looking at data sets
Okay.
and not really, so quantitative information rather than qualitative information. And I think we made the point last meeting that really there are lower populations to draw from to begin with in both of those areas. Yeah.
Douglas?
Yeah, my question is more or less focused on the RELLIS campus.
Yes.
And going out to 2040, if I'm not incorrect, we are talking or reflecting the possibility of a total of 5 physical structures on that piece of property.
That's correct.
And it looks like we're currently in one and then part of the A&M system across the street. And it appeared, excuse me, and it appears over the time we're going to grow on that campus about 4,000 students. So that equates to each one of those additional buildings only housing, or I guess you could say, having 1,000 students in them. And they appear to be of the same size we currently have. So I was just curious how you got to 5 buildings when we have one building at about, I think it's 2,500 is what it should hold. So intuitively, I'm saying, well, the other 4 buildings, if the same size, should be able to bring in another 10,000 students, but we're only showing the entire growth to be 4,000 over that year. So I'm just curious how you arrived at such a big growth in buildings over there with such a small relative to the full 2,500 per building.
I think there might be 2 things at play there. One is the difference and sort of the translation that we make between total head count of attendance and then translating those into full-time student equivalents that we use to develop those space need projections. So if the head count is 2,500, but those are, some of those are hybrid students in addition to those who are attending in person full-time, then there's a bit of a translation that happens when we get to the full-time equivalency that we're using to develop the actual space needs for that campus. I think that's one thing. The other thing is that we're projecting a variety of space needs on that campus, not just for instruction, but also other types of support. So I think part of that might be that in later phases, some additional proportion of support space would come online in those future buildings on the campus.
It just seems like the volume or the differential in the volume of what is existing there is pretty wide. So that's why I was asking the question.
Well, we also do have Doug here. Did I speak to that correctly, or is there anything else that you?
Those 2 factors account for that difference.
You're talking about then the like a support facility, library or
That's correct. Well, space like
student center or something.
both. It's study spaces like the library, but also support spaces like more back of house type space as well.
And exercise area. Somewhere.
One other question coming back to the Brenham campus.
Yes.
It may have been in there. I didn't see it because I wasn't really concentrating on it at the time, but the mentioning of the P3s, the new P3s that were shown in here to be coming online.
Yes.
I didn't see anything that represented the number of beds that would be there. And the reason I was asking that question is because it appears that the total population grows about 600 students over that time frame. And I realize we're taking some offline, but I was curious if there's some correlation between are the beds that you're coming on and are going off, if that, how that impacts that $600 student population.
We did look at that, and I can't recall the beds for both of those P3 projects. One was 300, and I think the second was 375 beds. But we did do the math to look at what the addition of those new projects, how that would pencil out with the other residence halls that would be coming offline. Part of one of the goals that was set for the master plan was to increase the overall number of beds available to students on campus. I think right now the percentage is around 64% of beds available to the on-campus and hybrid student headcount. And with the implementation of the master plan, we would get that up to about 70%.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Krausen, do you have anything?
I'd like to just make a comment about the Schulenburg question again, since this is a workshop and we're trying to decide, maybe what we should do with those campuses. In a lot of our discussions, it's been made apparent that, we're not losing money in those two campuses. I think we're, at least, cash flowing those campuses. But I know there is a cost to oversight and administration of any entity. I mean, our lowest volume Burger King, it still takes a lot of time for somebody to oversee those operations, make sure the employees are doing what they need to do and that type of thing. So I think we need to, make sure from an administration standpoint, we need input from you on, what exactly does it take and what are we having to do there that we could be doing somewhere else if we did not have to take care of those campuses. So that's just more of a statement than anything else. But I think that's certainly worth us thinking of as a board.
Rebecca, Ms. Ayler, do you have any other questions? Okay.
I do have one comment to follow up on Jim's comments. At a prior administration, the community of Sealy was willing to float a bond issue, not a bond issue, a maintenance tax position. And everything was done, to my recollection, except the final signature that was needed to, I think it has to go before the Higher Education Coordinating Board, if I remembered. And somehow that fell by the wayside. So I think there might still be support in that community to come up with a maintenance tax to support a campus over there to make it even better than break even or whatever. So that's for the benefit of those of you who were not on the board at that time. And that is certainly something that could actually be introduced to the Schulenburg folks too. And again, it's a maintenance tax, and it's not a tax that they become part of the district. So that's just information that you're thinking of.
I think one of the recommendations or thoughts was that if we want to re-engage those communities and try to figure out how to make it better than what it is, that's one of the options that we have, obviously, going forward. So, Randy, Reverend Wells, do you have any other questions? Good. Ms. Bain, do you have any questions? Okay. We thank you all so much.
Mosier, can I come back my turn again?
Okay.
Sorry. On the Sealy, back to the Sealy Schulenburg, I know the options here is status quo, evolve, or no campus. The evolve has been such a challenge because I know Becky has done everything in the world to try to build programs, but just doesn't seem to be much there. I don't know what the answer is. And then for Sealy, I think absolutely we need to look at a new location. I mean, that's been a mess ever since we first went there.
Yeah.
We tried to get that front building that, back even with Dr. Volter was helping us with that. And for some reason they wouldn't lease that. That would have been much better than it is now. It's on I-10, which is nice, but it's on the wrong side of I-10.
When you're
And
going
coming in
out.
from Houston, it's on the
Yeah.
wrong side. So,
Yeah.
so if anything with Sealy, we've got to find somewhere else
We
to
need-
go.
Well, I think that's something we need to reengage and talk about and then try to see what options we might want to try to do, for sure. And we do, thank y'all so much. We appreciate you coming back. We may just get you back 2 more times. I don't know. Thank y'all so much. It's been an
Thank you. It
experience.
really
I
has
know
been a
that
pleasure.
our staff and administration has learned a lot in this process and we appreciate it. And I know the boards will, I know I go to sleep reading on this every night.
Happy to help you out with that. All right.
Thank
you
y'all
very
so much. All right, appreciate it. Trustees, we will be taking action to receive this in our board meeting later, so if you had any questions, it's too late now, so.
We have a second chance though at the board meeting.
Yeah. I can cut that short. too. No, I can't, but Jeff, give me. All right, let's go to our next item, which is the budget. This is another item that we've had some considerable discussion on. I think, again, Mr. Savanes is going to take us through that and see if there are any questions or issues that need to be discussed thoroughly on the budget, because we need to act on that also at the board meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Hensley, members of the board. Our experience or our environment now is so much different than what it was a year ago. And it's much easier for us, but it still presents some challenges. I mean, last year at this time, we were looking at the possibility, a worst case scenario of a 20% decrease in enrollment. We were looking at a possibility of the state coming back and grabbing 10% of our appropriations during the year. And then we were looking at obviously very reduced revenue coming from our auxiliary enterprises because we had gone to single occupancy. So there are some, we're not out of the woods yet. There's still some challenges out there, but they're nothing like what we had to deal with last year. We also had as a safety net for ourselves, the federal funds. But I wanted to tell the board that Blinn had also, because of its very conservative manner in how it budgeted, we had created our own safety net. And despite, and I do like the federal money adding to our coffers, but at the end of the day, we're being very careful to make sure we're not dependent on that money. And right now, even if we did not have that money, as you'll see in my report that I will show for April, we still would be in the black. We'd still be doing good. So, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to bring this slide up. I know the board has seen it repeatedly, but I think it's important for us to understand that the budget process is an annual process. It begins in November with the development, culminates with the board voting in June, which you will do next month. And then by August, we begin implementation, and then we begin watching it and monitoring it and assessing it to make sure that we do not go off track. And then in November, the process begins all over again for the following year. And it does take the entire organization. It is a bottom-up approach, matching our strategic initiatives with the request. This year, we had about $4 million worth of request personnel and operational. We're not able to do all of those. 75% of them were personnel, but we're doing as much as we possibly can. I wanted to take a different approach than what you've seen before to bring you into the process, help you understand, especially because there were so many changes last year, and then what we're going to be doing this year. So what we do is when we're developing the budget, we have to look back to what we consider to be a base amount. And our base amount is the fiscal year 21, actually the current budget that we're in now. We made these changes to it on the revenue side, and I wanted you to see how it's impacted when we put together the budget for fiscal year 22. So begin with state appropriations. I said earlier, we thought the state was going to take back money, so we reduced our appropriation by our budget for $2.5 million. Well, this year, the 2.5 million, it didn't happen. There were some universities that did get cut, community colleges did not. So we're adding that back in there. So we added $2.5 million back for fiscal year 22, and then there's another $1 million. Right now, the legislature has not convened. They'll finish up by the end of this month. There are two bills that we're looking at, the House bill and the Senate bill. The Senate bill is about $350,000 more. The House bill, or both bills have us increasing by at least $1 million. So we took the House bill and that amount and added that on to, again, to be very conservative. So the 2.5 that we took away last year, we added that back, and then the $1 million too. Tuition and fees, the $8.7 million. Said earlier that last year we contemplated the possibility of a 20% decrease in enrollment. Obviously, that was going to have a significant impact on our revenues. We didn't realize that. Thank goodness we didn't have a 20% decrease. So what we did is we went back and projected what it would have been, or similar, trying to put together some numbers that tell us what it would have been if we had looked at the credit hours that we actually experienced and extrapolated that out to with the tuition fees that we had, the rates that we had for this year. It would have added back $8.7 million to our budget. That's our base that we're now looking at and saying, well, we want to add that back to fiscal year 22. So we've added $8.7 million back. It's a reflection if we stay even with the credit hours that we have this year, that we will add back $8.7 million. There's more money in there. That's at the $3.2 million more. That has to do with revenue rates that we've increased. It also has some auxiliary funds in there too. On the interest revenue side, we were optimistic and hoped that we would get $1.1 million, which is what we budgeted in fiscal year 21. We're decreasing that by $350,000. We think we're going to hit $750,000, and we're going to budget the same amount for next year. I have the federal government's higher ed emergency relief funds grants that we had counted on last year for fiscal year 21, $4.1 million. We're going to count on another $4.1 million. So we will at least be able to have that much money, much more money, and I'll explain to you in a minute, there's actually going to be more than that. But that's going to, so the impact to fiscal year 22 is about the same because we had 4.1 last year, we have 4.1 this year. Reserve funding. Last year, we knew that our expenses on our budget were going to exceed our revenue. We just didn't have enough money coming in because of the tuition and fees going down. So we budgeted out of our reserve funding our $4.6 million that we thought we might need to use. We haven't needed to do that. You've been watching the monthly reports. We're doing very well. So we don't think that we're going to need that in fiscal year 22. We think we're going to be better off. So we've removed that entirely. Other revenue assumptions, HERF 3, we will be receiving. We got notice this past week, there will be another $33.8 million coming our way. It's not been given to us yet. It's been allocated to us, but it's not been set aside for us, but we know it's coming. 51% of that will go for student grants. 49% of that will go for institutional purposes. So we're going to have a significant amount of money, which I will use the 4.1 at least to make it available to us, but there'll be more than that. Student housing, food service, because, and I wanted to point this out, the decision that what we had discussed back in March is that we contemplated remaining at single occupancy for the dorms. And now we're optimistic with things are going very well. The vaccines are working, that we're going to move that up to double occupancy. And it's going to have an impact on our student housing revenue as well as food service. Now on the expense side, for fiscal year 21, we had a budget back in FY20 of $7 million because enrollment we thought was going to go down. We ended up decreasing that by about $2 million. For fiscal year 22, we want to add back half of that, giving us a budget of $6 million. Travel, back when we contemplated the budget, we didn't anticipate that we would have very much face-to-face. We didn't really look at the virtual conferences that might take place. Nobody had really developed those at that time. They have since done that. And while we may not have the hotels and the transportation to get there, there's still cost associated with that. So we want to add back that $1 million for all of the departments. R&R, we took $3.6 million out of our operational budget and budgeted that from our capital and deferred maintenance reserve. We want to put that back in to our operational budget, $3.6 million for fiscal year 22. And then contingency, we had $2 million in fiscal year 20 that we had budgeted. We took all that away for fiscal year 21. We want to restore a portion of that for fiscal year 22. Other expenses we talked about in March, that what this budget has is what we are proposing as a 2% increase for all full-time faculty and staff. Also, the additional $400 for longevity for each full-time faculty member. At the time, and we're still not completely sure, but we have, as we do with the appropriations, a pretty good information that there will be no increases to health insurance. We had thought that it might be as much as 3%, but looks like there's not going to be any increases there. We'll know that by the end of this month. We have asked for a $25 increase for part-time faculty rates. Last year, the board approved $100 per course. And what we have discovered is that other institutions were kind of thinking along the same lines, and they increased their rates too for faculty. And so we're trying to stay competitive. In a survey that was done, even though we added $100 per course, we ended up dropping on the survey from tied to 10th to 11th. And so we're trying to stay competitive. Debt service increase because of the 2 bond series that we have borrowed money. There's additional money that we have to pay back on an annual basis. New buildings increases. We're contemplating 2 new buildings, the science building here on the BRENHAM campus, that there'll be costs associated with that, as well as even though the RELLIS building will not open up until the fall of 2022, we're actually going to take over the building next summer, so we have to put some money in there for that. There's custodial costs. There are some maintenance that needs to be done, even though they're brand new buildings. We need to stay up with it, and then the grounds and all of that. Utilities also is a big expense. So this is a summary or summarize all of those items that I just had conveyed to you. They add up to $10.4 million worth of revenue, and on the cost side, another $10.4 million. But it's just all the restoring and increasing and removing things that all add up to this amount of money. So then on the revenue side, just to give you a big picture of how this is going to be, how this is going to look, what it's going to look like. So the second column, fiscal year 22, is what we're proposing. It all adds up to $121 million. You see the very big difference between what we budgeted in fiscal year 21, the column right next to it, about $16 million difference. And then you go to the far right, which is the estimate. Revenues are a little bit easier to project than expenses, so we were able to extrapolate that out. We think we might hit $129 million. And the big one is, look at that second to last row, miscellaneous revenue. It's the federal money. We think we're going to bring in $21 million this year. And so that's a big portion of it that's helping us realize that. And most of that, as Mr. Bohart has pointed out, is moving down to the bottom line. That's a good thing. I mentioned going from single occupancy to double occupancy. This is the impact that it would have: $1.1 million more in our housing revenue compared to what we budgeted this year. Same thing with meal plans. It would increase the number. Obviously, there'd be more students on campus, so it'd add additional $641,000 to our revenue from the meal plans. On the expense side, again, this is a big picture. The operating expense total up to almost $108 million. Again, higher, about $6 million higher than what we budgeted this year. I've talked about some of those increases, the 2% increase for salaries and things of that sort that are in there, putting back $1 million for travel. All of those are adding up. Most of it has to do with our personnel costs. We like to take the bird's eye view of it to make sure that we don't get too far out. So we look at these percentages. And if you look on the far left, or the pie chart to the left, is in the bottom, it says student services 8%. That's the only one that has increased from the 7% that we had the year before. We think it is because we've added back that travel, which is a significant portion of it is in student services. There's also some work study. 50% of our work study is in that category. So adding those all added. Now the one that's lost, I don't know if it's lost, but actually it's more of an increase because of student services that went down was the academic and vocational side. We do plan on budgeting, R&R said that's $3.6 million. These are just very general categories that we have typically put in there with an expectation that we will look at these throughout the year. There's some of these that are large. We will obviously come back to the board and seek your permission for them. I still want to budget some of our capital projects out of the other ones. The R&R was what I call operational side, just typical maintenance. These are going to be larger projects greater than $300,000. Again, we will bring those back to the board when we're ready, but our expectation is that we will use unrestricted cash to be able to accomplish those. That's our budget. It's going to be our budget for that. So the big picture, just to what I like to look at when I start putting together some of these budgets and work with staff is, and this is something that we try to do from the bond ratings perspective, looking at Moody's and Standard & Poor's, we try to let them see that we're having gradual growth in our revenue. Well, you can see on the top that isn't quite what happened. We had budgeted $115 million in 2018. We did go up to 119, almost 120 million for 1920. That actual number shows almost 118 million. It would have gone over 120 million if we hadn't given back $3.4 million for refunds for housing and food service at the end of the semester as we went into the pandemic. But 121 puts us on that elevation that's higher than what we had before. So I think it's important for the college to strive for a little bit more. I think that still is conservative, given the fact that we have not included a good portion of the federal money that will end up coming our way again. That concludes the presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? I believe we're in good shape, Mr. Simonis. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Very good.
I believe that's it. Trustees, we will take that budget up for action at during our board meeting. So, all right, we're going to.
It's in June.
That
meeting is in June.
Oh, in June. Okay. Well, if I can get, I might get it today. Heck, I don't know. All right. Let's move along. I know that we have a lot on our agenda for the board meeting that will be coming along here fairly shortly. So we need to take up the update on the COVID-19. And Mr. Schubert, are you going to handle that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mosier. Trustees, Dr. Hensley, it's great to be with you all this evening. We've got just an update we want to provide you guys on our COVID presentation. But before I start, I'm going to hand the floor to Dr. Hensley.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, trustees, for this opportunity to share this topic of conversation with you this evening. I am very pleased to let you know that it is our intention to fully reopen to our pre-COVID standards in the fall. And that means that we will be operating much as we did prior to February a year ago. From the academic front, we will resume full face-to-face classes, and we will continue to have our blended and some of our online options as we've always had at Blinn. I will be sending out a letter to faculty and staff either later this evening or tomorrow morning, notifying them of the dates that they will fully return. And we will be transitioning starting immediately for the summer session as we blend our way towards the full renewal of the operations. We have staff available on the YouTube, as well as Leighton has just a brief summary he's going to give you of a few specifics. And then we have Dr. Lush here this evening. We're so happy that you could join us this evening. We're going to allocate most of our time, trustees, for you to speak to him so that he can validate or not whatever he thinks that we are doing at Blinn as to whether it's appropriate or not to proceed accordingly. The last thing that I would say is that you will notice that we are maskless. You may or may not be aware that the governor made an executive order this evening or this afternoon, and Leighton will clarify that for you as well. With that, Leighton, thank you so very much for your leadership. On behalf of all of us and all of the vice chancellors, I would particularly like to thank you. This has been a challenging year, and everyone has more than stepped up to the plate to handle it in a beautiful way. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hensley. Echo those sentiments about everyone stepping up from top to the bottom of this organization. Everyone has stepped up and just really done 110% this last year. And we are excited to be moving back to more normal operations in the fall. The chancellor did mention the governor's executive order, GA 36, which did, effective immediately, remove the ability for all governmental entities to mandate a mask order. And so effective immediately, we are in that group. There's some provisions for other type of government entities that are different than Blinn, but we are in that group. So effective immediately, under the governor's order, there's no more mask mandate at government entities. So that just came down just today, actually. I was talking to the chancellor about that earlier today. Good timing on that, so we could present that to you guys at the board meeting today. Just a very brief rundown of what we mean by sort of normal operations. I really want to leave most of the time for Dr. Lesh. You guys can talk with him about specifics and get his expertise here. We're so excited that he was able to join us this evening. We will be returning to that full campus operations and activities that students and staff and faculty are used to. That'll be increased capacities in classrooms. You heard about the double occupancy in housing. You're also going to hear about 100% occupancy in other non-classroom functions. We're talking cafeterias, food services, cruisy center, those sort of items that are as well as that student experience. We're really happy to get that back and able to move that forward in that full capacity. And so we're going to be opening that up to the full student service and activity perspective. Part of what we're also going to be doing that, and we missed these as well, we're hosting those internal and external events that we always do at Blinn, and really look forward to that schedule of those internal and external events from our internal people, but also our stakeholders and community partners that can use our facilities as well. So we're very excited about that. We are looking to, as Dr. Hensley mentioned, there will be some announcements coming out about employees, staff, and faculty coming back and the ramp up of the summer. We're going to use these summer months to just get back into that transition of going back to normal operations. When I look back at the calendar and realize it's been, a year since February that we've been doing this, it seems like a lot longer than that. And so it's going to take some time to get back into that normal swing of things, but we're looking to do that. I'm going to go ahead and pass the floor to Dr. Lesh, and so he can discuss the details and everything he's seeing with the pandemic. And of course, we're always available for any questions should you have any. Thank you.
Howdy. It's been an interesting year, hasn't it? Kind of glad that's over. It's nice to be able to give good news for once too. It seems like a year of where I was always giving people cancer diagnoses. So finally to be able to say that things are improving. Case numbers in the state of Texas continue to decline. I always keep an eye on the rolling numbers. Right now we're at levels that were last seen in early June, and they're continuing to decline. I think the reason for that is an effective vaccine program, especially in Washington County. We've been very successful in our sub-hub that we had here for several months. On top of that, I think we're getting close to herd immunity. If you look at the number of cases we've had, the number of unreported cases that have probably been out there, and then you add the successful vaccination rates, right now things are looking very good. Active cases in Washington County are under 50 for the first time in a very long time. Death rates continue to drop. It's extraordinarily mild in the hospitals right now. 1 or 2 cases around here intermittently. Over in College Station, they have ups and downs, but overall, the state of the situation is wonderful. So things are looking better. Of course, every time I seem to say something good, we down the road could have something bad. So of course, with everything, we need to be able to adjust at a moment's notice. But I think the plan for opening in the fall is absolutely appropriate. I think the way things are looking right now, there's no reason to be planning for more of these restrictions in the future. And then actually, that was good news. I just heard about the governor's mandate. It sounds like things are starting to clear up. So I'll be happy to answer any questions y'all have about this.
Any questions?
One thing I do have a question on is, the Blinn policy in regards to if someone did get exposed or they did test positive, what will be our procedure going forward into the next year as to how quickly that student can come back into the fray?
And if we want to continue following CDC guidelines, there was a guideline made, I believe in early January, that gave the option, and I don't think the local school district picked it up or many people did, but it was a 7-day quarantine, where 7 days of quarantine, where if on day 5 you're tested negative, you can return back to class with no further restriction. And, we're dealing with typically a younger population. On top of that, we've got younger folks, which are now also all available to be vaccinated. So the options are there, and it's becoming more of a personal choice now, which is why I think we need to start allowing the freedoms to come back too. I think a 7-day quarantine period with the 5-day test would be reasonable. I know that testing is readily available here on campus, which has been a huge boost to the community to be able to test here on campus. And so, the resources are there. So if that's something that the board feels is appropriate, I'd completely stand behind that.
Any other questions?
Trustees, that is what we're planning to do on the quarantine, 7 days testing after the 5th. That law from the CDC guideline changed on December the 30th of last year. It was directed primarily at employees, but it's our intent, and we've discussed this with Dr. Lesh in advance, that will be the protocol that we'll use in the coming year.
Not question or comments, if it's okay.
Okay, you got
I
it.
want to thank Dr. Lesh for his leadership overall, and Dr. Hensley and the entire Blinn team, because I know Trustee Bohart brought up the issue of testing, not just for Blinn, but for the community. And it has been such a big blessing, and it's gotten such great feedback from our community that Blinn was serving that capacity. And also kudos to our nursing department, because they were on the front lines in the beginnings, both helping with the call center as well as helping with the sub up. So Blinn really has helped this community get to a place where we could serve in a real great capacity. So thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Trustee
Thank you.
Wilson. We
We,
additionally intend to continue the testing on campus.
Dr. Lesh, I would hope you would extend our appreciation to all of the doctors and the medical staffs and all the various people that have done such a great job. It's really been
Absolutely.
wonderful. And I think we also, I don't want to assume anything, but for a community or a county of our size to have a sub hub here, those things don't just happen.
No.
And I think we need to acknowledge that the senator, if you might just mention that we appreciate that effort.
Absolutely.
Jim, if you get a chance to see her. And
I may see her sometime. I don't know when.
But we appreciate you very much, and we appreciate what all's been done.
It's
And I want to say that our staff, this has not been this is not an easy thing to deal with. Sometimes you got to tell people things they don't want to hear, and it's not been an easy task for the administration and the staff and the people that have had to deal with this over the last year at Blinn. So we appreciate that too. So thank you again, Doctor. Thank you.
Douglas, got a question?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Lesh, just a question. We have a large student population here in our county. Is there anything special that we should do as this population of students come back on campus? I'm not sure.
He heard me.
I heard you. And I'm assuming most of the populations going to be moving in from somewhere within Texas, correct? I mean, we don't have a lot of students moving in from foreign areas, et cetera. Case counts overall in Texas continue to decline. And I am anticipating and hoping that as time goes to the summer, those numbers continue to decline. I don't think there's much more we need to do for students coming into campus. Preemptive testing, there have been so many pitfalls with testing with this virus. It's sticky. So many false positives, so many false negatives. What do you do with this? I mean, we've had to roll with punches quite a bit over the last year. I don't think right now that there needs to be anything specifically done for the students when they come in, because once they come in, they typically are going to stay on campus and then they will become part of the community as far as I'm concerned. And then after a couple of weeks, they are functionally part of our community. So I really don't think much needs to be done so long as we're watching for another outbreak, which I'm hoping we won't see. Like I said, with probable herd immunity, with the vaccines the way we are, I would, do what we can to encourage these young people to get vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated, I think you probably do not need to be quarantined if exposed. And that's another thing is, I don't like top heavy-handed mandates that say you've got to do this. Then again, if you put it to them in an adult way and say, if you get your vaccine and you get exposed, you won't miss any class. And so that's some ways of encouraging these young folks to get the vaccines, because they're not in the highest risk category. Yet they are, the newer variants are hitting people a little bit younger. They're not dying from it, but they are getting sick with it. So I think so long as we can offer those opportunities, that'd be good.
Thank you.
Trustees, in summary then, thank you all, trustees, for your leadership and your guidance during this difficult period of time. This is extraordinarily unusual for administration, but also equally extraordinarily unusual for trustees and governance too. So I want to thank you. I'd like to thank Senator Colkhorst, who had an extreme amount of influence on having the sub-hub here, and we're so grateful for her leadership and the representation that she provides for us. I'd like to thank Dr. Lush. Thank you so very much for your medical guidance along the way. It's been very appreciated, and very appreciated that you could come this evening. I'd like to thank the vice chancellors for their amazing leadership. Trustees, I would not be overstating if I told you that we have spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours since last February working on just COVID-related issues. And I publicly want to thank an amazing staff for their leadership. I'd like to thank our faculty and staff. I know that there's some trepidation out there and some sense of hesitancy perhaps on where we're headed. Please know that we care about you and we care about everyone at Blinn, and we will continue to monitor every step of the way. But it is our intention starting tomorrow that we are finding our way back, and we will make a transition with staff returning between now and August, with the intention that we will put out a date that later this evening of when all staff will be back in August. And then for our students who have any concerns about enrolling, please hear my voice that Blinn is open for face-to-face classes, for blended classes, for Zoom classes. We have almost any modality that might be beneficial to you, and the choice is yours. We just invite you to come to our extraordinary institution, Blinn. On behalf of that, trustees, I thank you all.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, doctor. We appreciate it.
Yeah, Charles, can I say something? And
all right.
I just want to say I'm very disappointed that we didn't have a graduation this year. When most of our other counterparts had it, we didn't have a pinning or anything. I sure wish we would have not made that decision. So I just think we missed on our students. Our high school's having it, A&M's had it, Sam Houston's had graduation. I don't quite understand why Blinn couldn't have it. So just wanted to get that point across.
All right. Thank you. All right. Trustees, I need to acknowledge that Mrs. Bain joined us at 4:12 and Douglas Bohart joined us at 4:20. If you could note that in the minutes of the workshop. We have an executive session very briefly under accordance with 5.
No, that's after the regular board meeting. We're going to do
Well, it's on here.
We're going to take a break.
We don't want to do it now. Okay.
No, sir, we're going to go and just take a break. And
No.
reconvene at 5:30.
All right. We are going to put that off till after to handle that after our board meeting or in our board meeting later. So let me go ahead and entertain a motion that we adjourn, and we will reconvene the meeting at 5:30. It's 5:21 right now.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do I have a second? We have a second over here from Mr. Wells, Randy Wells. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. We'll reconvene here in 9 minutes.